Our story begins in a distant time, more than 2,500 years ago, in a grand city called Susa, which was the splendid capital of the mighty Persian Empire. Imagine great walls protecting the city, bustling streets, merchants offering their goods in the marketplaces, soldiers patrolling the avenues, and in the background, King Ahasuerus' imposing fortress with majestic towers shining in the sun. It is in this city that Esther lives, a very sweet Jewish girl with dark hair, sparkling eyes, and a delicate smile. Esther lost her parents when she was very young, and her life could have been filled with sadness and loneliness. Yet God cared for her through Mordecai, an older cousin who welcomed her as if she were his own daughter. Visualize this kind and wise man teaching Esther about her faith, her origin, and the value of courage even while living in a foreign land with customs different from her own. Despite the sorrow of not having her parents nearby, Esther grew up deeply loved by Mordecai. She learned early the importance of humility, respect, and trust in God, even in the face of adversities. They lived in a simple yet cozy house, in a modest part of the city where ordinary people worked hard every day to survive. Amid this simple routine, something extraordinary happened in King Ahasuerus' palace. After dismissing his former queen, the king decided to seek a new wife and ordered that the most beautiful young women from across the Persian Empire be gathered. Royal messengers proclaimed in the streets that all pretty maidens should be brought to the palace. Many young women dreamed of this unique chance to change their lives, but Esther, calm and humble, did not nurture such dreams. Her life was simple and modest. She could not imagine herself in a palace, much less being the queen of one of the greatest empires on earth. However, when the king's officers passed through the city streets, they immediately noticed Esther's incomparable beauty, which possessed a special softness and sweetness. Unable to refuse the royal order, Esther was taken to the palace, and at that moment, Mordecai advised her wisely. "My daughter, do not tell anyone about your Jewish origin. Trust in God, for perhaps He has great plans for you." In the palace, Esther was received along with several other young women. Imagine that splendid place with enormous rooms decorated with fine curtains of luxurious fabrics, ornamental vases with colorful flowers, and dazzling gardens where the maidens were prepared to meet the king. For many months, all the maidens received special beauty treatments with precious perfumes, aromatic oils, and stunning clothes. Yet Esther stood out not only for her external beauty, but for the kindness, simplicity, and wisdom she demonstrated daily. Haggai, the man responsible for caring for the king's young women, soon noticed something different about this Jewish girl. He perceived that she was not only beautiful on the outside but possessed a pure, sincere, and generous heart, earning his admiration and sympathy. Thanks to Esther's goodness, Haggai began to treat her with special affection, preparing her in the best possible way for the decisive moment, the presentation before the king. Then, the great day arrived. Each carefully prepared maiden was to be presented to King Ahasuerus, but none of them knew who would be chosen. Visualize the throne hall filled with gleaming marbles, guards in positions of honor, soft music in the background, and the king seated on his majestic golden throne. Esther waited calmly for her turn, praying silently and trusting in God to face that special and challenging moment. Finally, Esther entered the royal hall. Her beauty radiated softness, grace, and humility. When King Ahasuerus saw her for the first time, his eyes were captivated not only by her dazzling beauty but also by something special, almost magical, in her presence. A feeling of peace and tenderness overwhelmed the mighty king's heart, and in that instant, he understood that no other maiden could be his queen, only that humble, orphaned, and once unknown girl was worthy of such an honor. And so, before the astonished eyes of all, the king rose from his throne and declared with firmness and satisfaction, "Esther shall be my queen." Imagine the impact of this decision, the smiles and looks of surprise from the other maidens and the court. A simple Jewish orphan had just become the most powerful woman in the Persian Empire, chosen by God to fulfill an extraordinary purpose. Esther, the simple girl raised by her cousin Mordecai, now held an unimaginable position for someone of her origin. Yet this moment was only the beginning of something even greater and more surprising that God had planned. Soon, Esther would discover that being queen was much more than wearing beautiful clothes or living in a sumptuous palace. A grand mission awaited her, a mission capable of changing the fate of the entire Jewish people. But that is a matter for the next chapter of this inspiring story about a young woman who discovered that God can use the most unlikely circumstances to accomplish His great purposes. Time passed since Esther became queen. She now lived in the grand royal palace, surrounded by riches, comfort, and honors she had never imagined. Yet within her humble heart, the simplicity and faith she learned from Mordecai still beat strong. She knew that being there was not by chance but part of God's greater purpose. Within the luxurious corridors of the palace, a man named Haman was gaining more power and prestige before King Ahasuerus. Haman was an arrogant and cunning man, his eyes reflecting pride and unbridled ambition. Wherever he went, he demanded special reverence and honors, and everyone obeyed him with fear, everyone except one, Mordecai, Esther's faithful cousin, who refused to bow to any man other than God. Haman's fury grew as he noticed this bold disobedience from Mordecai. Driven by deep hatred, Haman decided not only to punish Mordecai but to completely destroy the people to which he belonged, the Jews. Then, with diabolical cunning, Haman went to King Ahasuerus and, using lies and half-truths, convinced the king that there was a rebellious and dangerous people in his kingdom who needed to be exterminated immediately. Unaware of Haman's truly evil intentions, King Ahasuerus authorized the terrible plan by signing a royal decree ordering that, in a single day, all the Jews be eliminated from the kingdom. Swift messengers carried the decree to every corner of the vast empire, and quickly the Jewish people began to weep, lament, and despair. Great suffering befell the entire Jewish community, which could not understand why such a tragedy had befallen them. When Esther learned of the news, she felt an anguish tightening in her heart. Her breathing quickened, her hands trembled, and silent tears moistened her face. She was Jewish, even though no one in the palace knew it. Esther found herself facing a profound dilemma: to protect her own life by remaining silent and safe in the palace's comfort, or to reveal her true identity and fight for her people, risking her life. Esther immediately recalled Mordecai's teachings, which so often stressed the importance of trusting God in every situation. But what should she do now? She knew that no one could approach the king without being summoned. There was a strict, unyielding law: anyone who entered the throne room without permission could be immediately sentenced to death, unless the king extended his golden scepter, granting mercy. Overwhelmed by this thought, Esther called her closest servants and sent an urgent message to Mordecai, asking that all the Jews in the city of Susa fast for 3 days and 3 nights. Imagine Esther, the young queen, kneeling in her royal chamber, surrounded by valuable furnishings and fine curtains, her face bowed in deep prayer. Her racing heart pleaded with God for courage, wisdom, and strength. She could not imagine herself any other way but as a humble servant before the Most High, imploring Him to strengthen her in that critical moment. At the end of the 3 days, Esther donned her finest royal garments, a dress embroidered with threads of gold and precious stones, symbolizing her position as queen. But behind her confident appearance, her heart still trembled with anxiety and fear. Taking a deep breath, she slowly walked to the royal hall. Every step echoed in her mind, every breath felt as heavy as a stone. Her heart pounded as she silently repeated one prayer: God, be with me. Let your will be done. Upon reaching the door of the great throne hall, Esther paused. She saw King Ahasuerus sitting on his majestic throne, surrounded by imposing guards with sharp swords. The king lifted his eyes and saw Esther standing there, uncalled. For a moment, silence filled the hall as every eye turned to her in disbelief, for they knew the severity of the law being broken. In that instant, Esther stood even firmer in her faith, repeating to herself with all her conviction, "If I perish, I perish." With determined, steady steps, she advanced slowly toward the royal throne. The king's heart was deeply touched as he beheld his young queen, beautiful, fragile, and courageous, in such a risky situation. Moved by unexpected tenderness, Ahasuerus slowly raised his golden scepter and pointed it in Esther's direction, showing her mercy and granting her permission to speak. Esther felt indescribable relief. God had heard her prayers. She approached humbly and gently touched the tip of the scepter, feeling her heart return to peace. Esther had faced fear and danger with courage and faith, fully trusting in the divine plan, even if it might cost her life. But that was only the first battle in a great war Esther would have to fight to save her beloved people. With the king's mercy secured, she was now ready to act even more boldly, confident that God was by her side. In that grand hall, filled with gold, imposing columns, and servants attentive to every gesture of the mighty King Ahasuerus, Esther faced the most important moment of her life. She took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on the mercy granted by the king, with the golden scepter extended to signal that she could speak freely. It was as if the world around had fallen into absolute silence, awaiting her words. With a firm yet gentle voice, Esther invited King Ahasuerus, and also Haman, to a special banquet she would prepare that very night. The king promptly accepted the invitation, curious to know what had driven Esther to risk her life with such an unexpected request. Haman, full of pride and vanity for being personally invited by the queen, accepted without realizing he was walking straight into a trap set by divine wisdom. Later, in the royal hall, imagine the beauty of that dinner prepared especially by Esther. Tables adorned with fine fabrics, delicious foods on golden platters, the soft aroma of spices filling the air, and torches gently illuminating the space. Esther remained calm, though her heart pounded, aware of the significance of that moment. During the banquet, the king, both satisfied and curious, asked again what her special request was. In that decisive moment, Esther took a deep breath and looked directly into the king's face, revealing for the first time her true Jewish identity. With an emotional voice, she told King Ahasuerus that her people were threatened with death by a wicked decree. The king's heart raced as he listened intently, then indignantly asked, "Who is the man who dared to plan such wickedness against you and your people?" With renewed courage, Esther calmly pointed to the man beside the king, clearly revealing the culprit. "The enemy and adversary is this wicked man, Haman." Haman's face turned immediately pale, filled with shock and fear, while the king, furious and indignant, abruptly rose and retreated to reflect in the palace garden. Desperate, Haman begged Queen Esther for mercy, falling at her feet in a humiliating plea. When King Ahasuerus returned and saw the scene, his anger deepened as he recognized the wickedness of Haman's heart. Without hesitation, he ordered the immediate arrest and severe punishment of that wicked man who had planned such cruel extermination. Haman's fate was now sealed, his intended evil against the Jewish people had turned upon him. Yet it was still necessary to undo the wicked decree threatening the Jews. Moved and deeply touched by Esther's courage, Ahasuerus immediately authorized a new decree, granting the Jews the right to defend themselves against their enemies. Royal messengers were sent in haste on swift horses to deliver the good news to every village and city in the vast Persian Empire. Imagine the emotion and relief overwhelming the Jewish families upon receiving this message of hope. Men, women, and children, who had once lived under the weight of fear, now joyfully celebrated in the streets, praising God for their salvation. Throughout the land, tears of sorrow gave way to radiant smiles, songs of gratitude, and joyful dancing. The Jewish people celebrated with feasts and banquets, marking that day forever as a special day of liberation, the day that would later be known as Purim. Esther, the young orphan who once seemed fragile and unprotected, was now admired and revered for her unwavering courage. Her story spread throughout the empire and across generations, inspiring many to have faith and boldness even in the most difficult situations. She was no longer merely the Queen of Persia, but a heroine whose name would be eternally enshrined in the hearts of the Jewish people. Imagine Esther now, dressed in her beautiful royal garments, walking calmly through the palace with a serene smile. She knew in her heart that God had been present all along, guiding every step of that challenging journey. She understood that her life was part of a greater purpose that not only transformed her own story but also saved thousands of lives. And so, Esther left an eternal legacy, proving that true courage is not the absence of fear but the determination to face it with faith and trust in Him who never abandons His children. Now, I invite you on a new journey through time, directly to the land of Israel, in an era when there was no king to govern the people. In that period, the nation was led by judges, leaders chosen by God to guide and advise the people. Among these leaders was a remarkable woman, a true heroine named Deborah. Imagine walking along a dirt path, surrounded by green hills and leafy olive trees, with the fresh scent of plants and the soft murmur of gathered voices in the distance. As you approach, You notice a large palm tree whose fronds form a comfortable shade, offering respite from the intense Israeli sun. Under that majestic tree, there sits Deborah, calmly dressed in simplicity yet radiating a wisdom that immediately captivates attention. Deborah was no ordinary woman. God had granted her an extraordinary gift of discernment, knowledge, and prophecy. Every day, men, women, and even children came from various regions seeking the counsel of this admirable woman. They brought their problems, disputes, doubts, anguish, and fears, trusting that Deborah could help them with her wise words. They gathered around her, beneath the cool shade of a large palm tree located between the cities of Ramah and Bethel in the mountainous region of Ephraim. Picture this scene vividly: Deborah seated under the cool shade of a huge palm tree, listening intently to each person with patience and empathy. The faces of those who sought her out revealed worry, anguish, doubts, or family conflicts, and many had traveled great distances knowing they would find true justice coming directly from God's heart. Surrounding her was always a respectful crowd. Strong and brave men, accustomed to war, bowed their heads in respect to her wisdom, a rarity in those times. Deborah earned her place not through physical strength but through clarity, justice, and the moral courage bestowed by God. Deborah was also known as a prophetess, meaning God revealed future events to her that others could not foresee. When she spoke, her words carried authority, and people felt as if God Himself were speaking through her confident and serene voice. In those days, Israel faced difficult times. The Israelites had strayed from God and suffered under the cruel oppression of the Canaanites, led by a terrible commander named Sisera. Many Israelites lived in fear, hiding without hope. Yet in the midst of this insecurity, Deborah was a beacon of hope, a light showing clearly that God had not abandoned them. Now imagine Deborah's determined look and her heart full of confidence when she realized that God was calling her to something greater. God revealed to her that the time of her people's suffering was coming to an end and that it was time to act. She received a divine message and immediately summoned Barak, an important commander of the Israelite troops. Visualize that incredible moment: Deborah standing firmly before the warrior leader, who, though accustomed to battles, now faced the challenge of listening to a woman. Something inside Barak told him that Deborah spoke with divine authority, her voice exuding such assurance that there was no room for doubt. Deborah looked into Barak's eyes and said with divine authority, "God commands you to immediately gather your soldiers. He will grant you victory over Sisera's army." Barak, however, hesitated. It was difficult for him to accept the challenge alone. He felt that the presence and faith of this woman were essential for him to proceed. Then, with surprising humility, Barak made a bold request. "If you go with me, I will go. But if you do not go with me, I will not have the courage to go alone." Deborah, with the courage of one who trusts fully in God, immediately replied, "I will certainly go with you, Barak. But know that because of this, the honor of victory over the enemy commander will be given to a woman." In that instant, Barak understood that Deborah was not just an ordinary woman but a true representative of God, a strong, fearless leader. He was determined to follow her guidance to the end. This moment marked the beginning of something grand, something that would forever change the history of Israel. Deborah, with her courage, wisdom, and a heart full of faith, would lead her people to victory, freeing them from oppression and suffering. But that miraculous and impressive victory is a tale for later. For now, keep in your heart the image of that resolute woman under the palm tree, a respected leader, an admired judge, a courageous prophetess who dared to challenge the limits of her time through the strength of her faith in the mighty God. Thus, Deborah became eternally remembered as a symbol of leadership and faith, an inspiring example for all generations. After many years of judging Israel under the cool shade of her famous palm tree in Ephraim, Deborah observed daily the growing sadness and suffering among her people. They arrived dejected, their faces marked by pain and fatigue from the cruel oppression of the Canaanites. In her wisdom, Deborah saw clearly that something had to be done to restore peace and bring freedom back to God's people. One day, as the morning sun softly shone over the green hills and the gentle wind rustled the leaves, Deborah deeply felt that God was giving her a clear, urgent message: the time had come to confront the oppressors. She took a deep breath, sensing that God was revealing the next step she must take. Deborah immediately summoned a man named Barak, known throughout Israel for his bravery and skill in battle. Imagine Barak arriving at the place where Deborah sat under the cool shade of her famous palm tree in Ephraim. He walked with strong steps, dressed in the typical attire of an Israelite warrior, his face serious and eyes determined. Yet in that moment, a hint of insecurity appeared in Barak's eyes in the face of the difficult task Deborah was about to reveal. With a firm and clear voice full of divine authority, Deborah said to Barak, "The Lord God of Israel commands you, gather 10,000 men from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun and take them to Mount Tabor. God will bring Sisera, the wicked commander of the Canaanites, along with his mighty army, to the valley of the Kishon. There, the Lord will deliver the definitive victory over your enemies." As Barak listened, imagine doubt beginning to show on his face. Despite his strength and bravery, he hesitated at that moment. His confidence wavered before the enormity of the mission and the recognized power of the enemy, knowing that Sisera possessed 900 iron chariots, the ultimate symbol of military might at the time. Barak looked intently into Deborah's eyes and, with humility and insecurity, slowly replied, "If you go with me, I will go. But if you do not go with me, I will not have the courage to go alone." At that moment, all eyes turned to Deborah, anxious for her response. A deep silence fell. Without a trace of doubt or fear, Deborah rose from her place and looked steadily at Barak, her expression firm and resolute, a clear sign that her courage came directly from God. Then, with a powerful voice, Deborah declared, "I will certainly go with you, Barak. But know from now on, the honor of victory over Sisera will not be given to you, but to a woman." Barak was taken aback by her firm reply, which seemed to herald something incredible and unexpected. Yet his admiration for Deborah's strength and his trust in her words immediately encouraged him. With a decisive nod, Barak accepted and quickly began preparing for the coming war. Meanwhile, Deborah remained serene, confident in the divine promise she had received. In her heart, she was certain that God would fulfill every word he had revealed. She knew her mission was not only to prophesy or counsel but also to demonstrate to all the people the extraordinary power that only God can manifest through those who trust Him completely. Men began to gather swiftly. Imagine the bustling movement of the Israelite tribes, soldiers arriving from all sides with spears and swords, ready for battle. Barak, strengthened by Deborah's words, believed deeply that God was leading them. Deborah stayed by his side as a living symbol of God's presence, continuously bolstering the soldiers' courage with her calm and confident demeanor. During these preparations, hope began to rekindle among the people. They realized they were not alone. Deborah, the wise and courageous woman, now embodied the clear voice of God, guiding them back to freedom. As the soldiers prepared for battle, Deborah reassured them with absolute certainty. "Do not be afraid, for the Lord has already delivered the enemy into your hands. Today will be the day of liberation." All eyes were on Deborah and Barak. The future of Israel was at stake, and Deborah, with her unwavering heart, showed everyone that having faith meant trusting the impossible and acting courageously in the face of the greatest challenges. But the incredible battle, the miraculous victory, and the surprising revelation about the woman who would receive the honor of victory are moments for another time in this inspiring story. That was Deborah, a remarkable woman who, in a society dominated by men, became God's courageous voice. Sitting under the cool shade of a palm tree, she never imagined that her courage and faith would be remembered forever, passing through generations as a symbol of bravery and absolute trust in God, who works powerfully through those who believe in Him completely. Finally, the decisive day arrived. Barak, now encouraged by Deborah's steadfast presence, gathered the Israelite soldiers on Mount Tabor. Imagine a multitude of warriors, determined and attentive to every instruction, ready for the most important battle of their lives. From the mountaintop, they could clearly see the valley below, where the immense and fearsome force of the Canaanites, led by Sisera, was preparing to fight. The Israelites' hearts raced as they beheld the frightening scene, thousands of enemies with armor gleaming in the sun, powerful horses, and most notably, 900 iron chariots, deemed invincible in those days. These chariots were like modern war tanks, intimidating even the bravest warrior. Yet Deborah, standing beside Barak, remained unshaken. She gazed toward the horizon with unwavering confidence in God. The soldiers looked to her for courage, and Deborah raised her voice amid the tense silence. "Rise up. Today is the day the Lord will deliver Sisera into our hands. God has already gone before you. Trust in him and advance." Strengthened by these words, the Israelite soldiers began rapidly descending the slopes of Mount Tabor into the valley. Imagine thousands of determined men marching, guided by the faith Deborah instilled in them. At the same time, Sisera, confident in his powerful army and in the iron chariots that symbolized his invincibility, ordered his men to advance to meet the Israelites. But at that moment, something extraordinary happened. As the Israelites rushed into battle, God intervened miraculously. An unexpected storm, strong and sudden, arose over the valley, bringing heavy rain, lightning, and fearsome thunder. The sky, once blue and calm, turned dark and threatening as lightning flashed and thunder roared, while torrential rain transformed the firm ground into slippery mud. Sisera's iron chariots, once feared by all, now sank into the mud and became completely immobilized. The Canaanite army, so proud and powerful, fell into confusion and despair. Soldiers ran in disarray, losing all the courage they once had. The mightiest military force in the region now appeared defenseless and vulnerable. Seeing clearly that God was acting on their behalf, the Israelites advanced with even greater courage and conviction. A battle that once seemed impossible was won with ease because God fought alongside them. Imagine the Israelite soldiers, full of confidence, utterly defeating the enemy army while Sisera, the arrogant and cruel leader, fled in terror, realizing he had lost the battle. Sisera, abandoning his defeated army, fled desperately on foot, searching for refuge. Once the mighty, invincible commander, he ran in desperation, seeking shelter wherever he could. And just as Deborah had prophesied, the honor of Sisera's defeat was given to a woman named Jael, who courageously eliminated the enemy, once again confirming Deborah's prophecy. Meanwhile, the Israelite soldiers returned from battle in complete victory. Deborah and Barak gathered the people to celebrate. Imagine the contagious joy that overwhelmed the people of Israel at that moment, entire families, men, women, and children rejoicing with songs of praise, dances, and shouts of happiness, grateful that God had performed a great miracle. Deborah, the wise and prophetic woman, raised her voice in an unforgettable song of praise to the Almighty. Her voice resonated with genuine gratitude and joy as the people joined in, celebrating that marvelous liberation. Picture Deborah, arms raised toward the sky, tears in her eyes and a radiant smile, glorifying God for the extraordinary victory. Joy filled everyone, turning that day into a memorable celebration for Israel. After that great miracle, the land of Israel experienced a time of peace and prosperity never before seen. For 40 years, no one dared to attack the people chosen by God. The courage, wisdom, and faith of that extraordinary woman were remembered in every home, passed down from generation to generation. Deborah, who once governed under the shade of a palm tree, became an eternal example for all. Her courage in the face of danger, her unwavering faith, and her divine wisdom showed the world that God can choose anyone to accomplish great things, even in seemingly impossible circumstances. That miraculous victory deeply marked the hearts of the people, reminding them forever that God is faithful and powerful to deliver those who trust in Him completely. Now, let me take you to a small village called Nazareth, nestled among gentle hills, surrounded by verdant fields and ancient olive trees. Nazareth was a simple and peaceful village where families lived modest lives, working in the fields, raising animals, and caring for one another with a strong community spirit. It was such a small village that many did not even know of its existence, yet God had grand plans precisely for that humble place. There lived Mary, a sweet and humble young woman with delicate brown hair cascading over her shoulders and eyes filled with uncommon tenderness. Mary was known for her kindness, pure heart, and sincere faith despite her youth. She was betrothed to Joseph, a hardworking and honest young carpenter, with whom she dreamed of building a family and a quiet life. They were simple but happy, trusting in God and certain that He cared for them at all times. On a day that seemed like any other, Mary was alone in her home, perhaps performing her daily tasks like tidying the house or preparing bread. Imagine the tranquility of that simple place, the sun softly streaming through the window, the distant song of birds, and the calm silence of the village. It was in this seemingly ordinary setting that something completely extraordinary happened. Suddenly, an intense yet gentle light illuminated the entire room. Mary looked up, surprised and a little frightened by that unexpected radiance. In the midst of the light, a majestic figure appeared before her, shining with indescribable beauty. It was the angel Gabriel, a special messenger sent directly by God. Imagine Mary's heart pounding faster, her breathing quickening as she beheld that celestial apparition. Perceiving the natural fear in the young woman, the angel Gabriel said in a gentle, comforting voice, "Do not be afraid, Mary. God is with you. You have been specially chosen among all women for something very important. You will bear a son, and you shall name him Jesus." Mary felt her hands trembling, and her heart raced, hardly believing what she heard. Her eyes widened in astonishment at the greatness of that divine message. Gabriel continued with calm clarity, explaining that this child would not be ordinary but the Son of the Most High, sent to save the entire world. Mary's mind must have been filled with questions, doubts, and fears, for she was not yet married to Joseph and had never known a man. "How can this be, since I am not yet married to Joseph?" she asked sincerely and respectfully. With a compassionate and gentle look, the angel explained patiently, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will completely overshadow you. Therefore, the one who is born of you will be called Holy, the Son of God. For God, nothing is impossible." In that moment, imagine Mary slowly comprehending the immense responsibility God was placing upon her. She knew that accepting this mission would mean facing many challenges, judgments, and hardships. Yet her heart was filled with trust and love for the God she had known since childhood. Mary took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a moment, and felt the profound peace only God can give. Then, with an absolutely pure and humble faith, she said to the angel Gabriel the words immortalized in history, "Here am I, the servant of the Lord, let it be done to me according to your word." At that very moment, the life of that simple, humble young woman from Nazareth changed completely. She had become not only an ordinary girl from a small village but the woman specially chosen by God to bring forth the Savior, the Messiah awaited for generations. From that moment on, her life gained deep and eternal meaning. Now, imagine Mary, a mother who experienced moments of wonder and deep pain alongside her beloved Son, Jesus Christ. From the very first moment she saw the tiny face of the newborn in that humble stable in Bethlehem, she knew she was in the presence of someone very special, destined to change the course of history. Visualize the young mother gently cradling her baby in her arms on that starry night. As she gazed at the delicate, fragile face of Jesus, wrapped in simple cloths and resting in a manger filled with straw, Mary held in her heart all the promises God had revealed to her. She knew, even in that humble moment, that she was cradling the Savior of the world. The years passed swiftly, and Mary closely followed every step of Jesus' life. Imagine her carefully tending to him during his childhood in Nazareth, teaching him his first steps and words, and watching him play along the village paths. She observed with quiet love as that boy grew in wisdom and grace before God and men. Mary saw Jesus transform into a wise and respected young man. Her maternal heart swelled with pride as she listened to him speak in the temple, astonishing even the wisest masters of the law. She witnessed with admiration the beginning of his public ministry, seeing him perform miracles that left multitudes in awe. Imagine Mary accompanying her son through the roads of Galilee, witnessing the blind receiving sight, the lame rising and walking, and incurable diseases being instantly healed. Each miracle deepened her certainty that her son was truly special, sent directly from God's own heart. But Mary's journey was not marked only by joy and pride. She would have to endure, alongside Jesus, the most agonizing moments a mother could face. Now imagine the moment when Mary sensed that the religious and political authorities saw Jesus as a threat. Her heart ached as the once enthusiastic crowds began to turn against him, influenced by envious and hostile leaders. Then came the darkest, most painful day of her life. Mary heard with profound sorrow that her beloved son had been arrested, unjustly accused, and condemned to death on the cross, a punishment for the most dangerous criminals. Her heart shattered, yet even in this excruciating pain, Mary never abandoned her son. Imagine that terrible scene, Jesus being led to Calvary, carrying a heavy wooden cross on his shoulders. Amid the crowd, Mary followed step by step, tears streaming down her face as her heart broke watching her dear son suffer. Every time Jesus stumbled under the cross's weight, Mary's heart suffered with him. Yet even in that dreadful moment, she remained steadfast, silently following him to the very end. At Calvary, Mary stayed by the cross, never leaving its side. Picture the scene, Jesus being nailed to the cross, and Mary watching intently the pained expression of her beloved son. While many fled in fear, Mary remained firm at the foot of the cross, fully aware that her son was about to die before her eyes. Her faithfulness outshone the pain she endured. Jesus looked down and, amidst his own agony, saw his dear mother. Their eyes met in a deep, unforgettable moment full of pain, love, and consolation. Imagine the depth of that silent glance between mother and son, a look that said everything without words. Finally, in that solemn moment, Jesus surrendered his spirit and died. Mary's heart was overwhelmed with an immense, indescribable pain, yet not even that could break her absolute faith in God's divine plan. Imagine that courageous mother clinging to God's promises even in the face of the greatest sorrow, a sorrow of losing her beloved son. For 3 days, Mary endured the deepest grief while Jesus' body lay in a cold tomb, guarded by a heavy stone. But on the 3rd day, everything changed forever. On that special Sunday morning, an incredible message spread through the streets: Jesus had risen. Imagine Mary's heart, once burdened by sorrow, now bursting with joy, hope, and gratitude at the news that her son was alive again. Jesus had conquered death, fulfilling the divine promise and confirming everything Mary had believed from the start. Mary saw her resurrected son, alive, radiant, and powerful. That strong woman, who never abandoned her faith, was overwhelmed with indescribable happiness. All the tears turned into radiant smiles and tears of deep gratitude. Her unwavering faith was honored by God Himself, showing the world that her trust was never in vain. Thus, Mary, the mother who remained faithful until the cross, became an eternal example of strength, faith, and courage. She demonstrated that true trust in God can endure even the harshest trials. Her story inspires generations, reminding us that God fulfills all His promises, transforming sorrow into joy, death into life, and suffering into eternal victory. These incredible stories of women like Esther, Deborah, and Mary are recorded in the Bible not merely to be admired or remembered as beautiful tales from the past. No. They exist to teach us something powerful that can transform our own lives today. Consider this. Esther, a young orphan who, despite her simplicity, was placed in a high position and risked her life in the name of justice and love for her people, teaches us that no matter how small or fragile we feel, God always has an extraordinary purpose for each one of us. All it takes is the courage to say yes and to trust in the divine plan, even in the most difficult situations. Deborah shows that God can use anyone, regardless of condition, gender, or social status, to accomplish great deeds. Her courage and firm leadership remind us that with genuine faith, we can overcome any challenge. Her story makes it clear that those who trust in God never face their battles alone, for He fights by their side, ensuring victory even in seemingly impossible circumstances. Mary, the faithful and courageous mother who accompanied Jesus to the cross, demonstrates the true meaning of love, fidelity, and hope. She never gave up, even in the face of the greatest pain a mother can experience, because she trusted that God would never abandon those who trust in Him. Her story encourages us to remain steadfast and hopeful even amid the losses and hardships of everyday life. These women were not just figures from a distant time, They are living examples of the power of God acting in the lives of those who believe in Him. They clearly show that true strength comes not from our own abilities, but from our absolute trust in God. Today, you too can experience that strength, courage, and hope in your life. No matter what challenges, fears, or difficulties you face, know that God is with you, ready to transform any pain into victory, sorrow into joy, and despair into renewed faith. Let the example of these women inspire you to trust and believe that God can and will act extraordinarily through your life. Never forget, you too have a grand purpose that God has specially prepared for you. All that is needed is to trust Him completely and walk courageously, knowing that your story can be as powerful and inspiring as that of these wonderful women from the Bible.